So good morning, everybody. Hello there. Welcome to this session. I'm going to quickly start by introducing myself, and then we'll get going. I tend to talk quite fast, and I realize that half of you in the room are listening in a second language, so I will try my best not to go as fast as I usually would, but once I get flowing, I might speed up. So I will try and breathe a little bit so that you can follow what I am saying. But let me quickly introduce myself. So this is who I am. My name is chriscooke.com is my website. That is where you can check out what I do online, and I am the founder and the managing director of a company called CMU, which stands for Complete Music Update. So we're based in London, and we exist to help people navigate and understand the music business. Okay, so that's what CMU does. We do this in a number of different ways. So we report on the music industry. So every day of the week at around about 11 a.m. London time, so midday continental European time, we report on all the key developments in music and the music industry from the previous 24 hours. The daily's free, so you should all sign up at cmusignup.com. If you don't like reading, we have a podcast called Setlist that comes out every Monday morning. And with Setlist, we talk about the big stories of the previous 7 days in music. So if you sign up Setlist, again, free, it will land in your podcast feed of choice every Monday morning. And then if you pay us some money, you can access the CMU Trends Library, where we explain how the music industry works and all of the latest trends and developments. So that's how we report on the music industry. But I'm here today really as CMU Insights. So Insights is our consultancy business. It's where we research, teach, talk, and explain how the music industry works. So we offer a range of training courses, seminars, masterclasses on music rights, copyright, digital, artist deals, direct-to-fan, marketing, social media, PR, music media, and so on. We present at various conferences around the world, just like this one here today. We also have our own conference that sits as part of the Great Escape, which is a showcase festival in the UK. It takes place in Brighton each May, and we present basically free full-day conferences for the delegates at the Great Escape. So next year our themes, we haven't announced this yet, so you need to keep this a secret, but next year our themes will be education and streaming income and how music marketing is changing. At least two of which I will touch on here today. As well as that, we do a lot of research work. And most of what I'm going to talk to you about this morning is based on a piece of research that we've been working on now for 4 years called the Dissecting the Digital Dollar project. And so this was commissioned by the Music Managers Forum in the UK. So the MMF UK represents about 500 artist managers based in the UK, from those new to the business, working with their first artists, all the way up to some of the most established veteran artist managers managing superstar artists out of the UK. And the MMF approached us about 4 years ago now because streaming was starting to take off. About 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, was when the streaming business first started to generate decent money. And so suddenly artists, particularly established artists, were starting to see all right money coming in from the streaming services on their royalty statements. And when that happened, artists, on the one day of the year, when an artist takes an interest in their royalty statement, artists started to say to their managers, okay, I'm signed to Sony Music, say, Sony Music reckons that I'm owed £5,000 or euros or dollars for streaming for last year, or Spotify for last year, or whatever. What does that mean? Okay, when Universal or Sony or whoever says I'm owed $5,000, how do they know that? How does Spotify know that? How does streaming work? And the managers had to say to their artists 5 years ago, we have no idea. No idea how it works. We don't know how the deals were done. We don't know how the royalties are calculated. We've no idea how Sony has decided that you're owed £5,000. And so the managers started phoning up the MMF in the UK and saying, okay, do you understand how this works? How do the deals work? How do the royalties work? And the MMF had to say, we have no idea. And so the MMF came to us. And so for the last 4 years, we've been working on analyzing and explaining how the streaming business works, how the deals are structured, how the royalties are calculated, how people get paid, why sometimes people don't get paid, why sometimes people don't get paid anything like they think they should be paid. And so we've been looking at the deals, looking at the issues, looking at the way the artist-label relationship has evolved, and at the moment, we're looking at how songwriters get paid. Usually with songwriters, they don't get paid, and there are all sorts of reasons why. So this is what the Dissecting Digital Dollar project has been looking at. We've been working on it for 4 years. Earlier this year, we compiled it all into a book. So if you're really, really interested in what I talk about today, if you go to Amazon, you can buy the Dissecting Digital Dollar book, which summarizes all of the work that we have done to date on this project. So that's one of our major pieces of research. Finally, we have an education program called CMU DIY. So this is where we do stuff with early career artists and those at the very start of their music careers. So we lecture at various music schools and colleges in the UK. We have a series of workshops aimed at young artists, and we work with the Featured Artists Coalition in the UK and an organization in London called Urban Development on a whole range of events for people at the very start of their music career. So that's all the plugs out of the way. I promise if you go to completemusicupdate.com, you can find out more about all of that, sign up to the bulletin, etc. Today, I'm here to present you with one of our CMU Insights speed briefings. So we present these speed briefings at various music events around the world. It's my first time in Luxembourg, so thank you very much to Sonic Visions for inviting me here today. And my aim is to give you some insights and some knowledge and some figures and some explanations from our research work and from our training courses. Well, it says 60 minutes up there, but I'm looking at the clock. In 45 minutes, okay? And so what I'm going to talk to you about this morning is basically top level how the streaming business works. So I'm basically going to talk about 3 different things. First of all, I'm going to do a very quick overview of where the streaming music market is as of 2018. And how streaming is performing country by country, which services matter, and so on and so forth. So we're going to have a very quick market overview. Then I'm going to give you a very sort of basic guide to how the streaming deals work. So how a streaming service like Spotify has gone about licensing the music, and therefore who it pays and how it works out what to pay. And when we get to the middle bit, there's a little bit of copyright law, so not only did I get you up at 10:30 on a Saturday morning, I'm then going to spend 5 minutes talking to you about copyright law. And then, although it'll be towards the end of the session, so hopefully you've woken up by then, I'm then going to explain how Spotify works out what to pay everybody every month. And it's really complicated. So there will be about 2.5 minutes where it's really complicated. Then in the final section, for anybody here who is either a self-releasing artist, or you're working with self-releasing artists, or maybe you're a very small label, I will explain how you get your content into these services and how you get paid. And then I will leave you with, beyond the deals and the royalties and getting your music on the services, what is probably the biggest challenge for everybody in the streaming age. So that's what I'm going to do in the next 42 minutes. So this is all going to be good. We'll get there. Very quick show of hands. Are there any artists in the room? Who here is an artist? Okay, so we have a few artists. And songwriters, you can be more than one of these. Okay. And who here is a label? Okay. Publishers? Managers? Okay. Is anyone here from a collecting society? I always do that before I start laying into collecting societies. So SASM aren't here, PRS aren't here, Gamer aren't here, right? It's all the collecting society's fault when we get to that stage. And then let's flip that round. Okay, as music consumers, as music fans, who here is a Spotify subscriber? Okay, and keep your hands up if you're paying for it. Okay, so look at that, you're all paying for it. Apple Music subscribers? Okay, Deezer subscribers? What else? Tidal? Okay, that's representative. That's always what you see. Most people say Spotify, a few people say Apple, a couple of people say Deezer. I mean, we're quite close to the French border. I thought we might have a few more Deezer subscribers. And then one person says Tidal. Is anyone here paying to access music on SoundCloud? So I don't mean a SoundCloud Pro account where you pay to publish. I mean a SoundCloud Go account where you pay to stream music. Okay, I met someone the other day who's a SoundCloud Go subscriber. First time at any of these events, I've met someone who is paying SoundCloud every month to access music. And finally, is anyone here paying to access YouTube? Okay, so the new YouTube Premium service. But obviously, not all of these are available everywhere, but it's always interesting to see. Okay, right. Let's start off by having a look at where we're at in the streaming business today. So I will start off by stating the obvious, because it's always good to state the obvious. We all know that the story of recorded music over the last 15 years is this story here. Not everybody in the room might be old enough to remember the start of this story, okay, but the story of recorded music since the early 2000s has been the story of a record industry shifting from selling plastic discs to monetizing and selling downloads, mainly through iTunes, to monetizing streams, whether that's through selling advertising or subscriptions. So this is the story of recorded music since the early 2000s. And the important thing to reference here is that the story is ongoing. Sometimes at events, we talk a lot more about streaming than anything else when it comes to recorded music, and therefore it's easy to think CD's gone, downloads gone, it's now exclusively about streaming. And of course it isn't. If we were to look at all the money that the recorded music business made worldwide in 2017. So this is the record industry, the recorded music business. So all the record companies, all the music distributors, and the recording artists they work with. If we put all of that money on one table and we divide it up, this is approximately how the money was split up in 2017. So you will immediately see about a third of the market is still selling plastic discs. It's still physical. Then we have digital, the massive one in the middle, so the biggest revenue stream is digital. And then the two on the right-hand side, the bigger of the two, is broadcast and public performance. So it's the money that TV stations pay, radio stations pay, and then pubs, clubs, bars, cafes pay when they play recorded music. So that will usually come through the collective licensing system. So in every country there is a collecting society, and that is the money that they are bringing in. The tiny slice on the right-hand side, that is sync, the synchronization of music into movies, games, and advertising. And it's interesting, quite often at music conferences, and I work on music conferences, you often get sync panels, don't you, at music conferences, where you'll have 4 music supervisors talking about sync. And they will tell you that in 2018, you make money out of recorded music through sync. And whenever you hear a music supervisor say that, I want you to remember that tiny, tiny slice on the right-hand side. That is the sync market. It's actually a lot smaller than everybody suggests. Now, within that slice, there are individual deals worth $1 million. So for certain artists and certain labels, sync is an incredibly big deal. But for the industry at large, the record industry, the publishers, it would be slightly more important, but for the record companies, it's actually a really small part of the business. If we break down these a little bit more, if we look at physical, depending which country you're from, because I suspect you're from a number of different countries, you know there's a vinyl revival going on. Okay, in multiple countries around the world, vinyl sales are up. So you might be thinking that that's what that physical box is there, but you're wrong. That little box there, that little grey box, that's the vinyl revival. So again, tends to get exaggerated. Vinyl sales are up, but it's still a relatively small part of the business overall. So most of that physical is compact discs. Now these are global figures, remember. And the 5 biggest music markets in the world for recorded music, by a long way, are the US, Japan, Germany, UK, and France. Those 5 countries generate way more money for the record industry, the recorded music business, than any other country in the world. And of the 5, Japan is still a CD market. Okay, over 2/3 of the money the Japanese record industry makes every year is by selling compact discs. You're probably also aware that Germany still makes more selling compact discs than it does out of digital. CDs are no longer more than half the market in Germany, so Germany's very much tipping. It's becoming a digital market because CD sales are now less than half. But they still outperform digital in total. And then the UK and France, actually, physical is still performing all right. America, physical has died. It's 15% of the market in the USA, which is the biggest market overall. So, CDs are still selling in certain key markets, which is why, globally, physical is still nearly 1/3 of the market. But look in the middle. When we look at digital, Downloads are dying, streaming is booming, and so streams now is the single biggest revenue stream overall, worldwide, and it's the growing revenue stream. Vinyl is also growing, public performance and broadcast is growing, sync is slightly growing, but the massive growth is in streams. So that's why we're here this morning to talk exclusively about the streaming market, because it's where the most money is now coming in, and it's where all the growth is occurring. So that's been the trend for a number of years now. CD sales continue to decline, downloads decline a lot, and streaming continues to boom. So there we go. The shift to digital and now to streaming is occurring globally. It's happening in different ways in different markets. So some markets, it's all digital. Some markets, it's all streams. Other markets, like Japan, Germany, and even UK and France, physical is still a big factor. Then you've got the emerging markets, countries like China and India, and especially Brazil, which traditionally made very little for the recorded music market because all the CDs that were sold in those countries were bootlegs. So the actual industry never saw any money. And mainly through mobile partnerships, streaming is taking off in those countries. So we're starting to see money coming in from India and especially China and even more so Brazil through the rise of the streaming services. So those markets are almost exclusively streaming because we never really had a physical market. We never had a download market, and streaming is finally starting to take off. So if we look down at the breakdown of the industries, so you'll see big markets, Japan, Germany, UK, physical still dominating in Japan, still significant in Germany, still pretty significant actually in the UK. Versus these markets, look at the US, really digital. Those Scandinavian markets, Sweden, Norway, almost exclusively digital, and all of that digital in the Nordic markets is streaming. Actually, most of it is Spotify. So actually Spotify is probably, streaming will be 95% of digital, and of that, 95% will be Spotify. So Spotify is a huge portion of the Nordic markets. And then if we look at the emerging markets, you'll see already China, 90% streams, because we never sold any CDs. Same for India. Brazil, public performance is much, much stronger. But nevertheless, digital is the biggest revenue stream overall. The other thing to say is, we all know that, and those of you who are old enough to remember this, the 2000s were not a great time to be in the record business because the recorded music industry every year in the 2000s made less than the previous year. So between 2000 and 2010, the global record industry lost more than half of its value. So that by 2010, the record industry was bringing in less than half what it had been bringing in 2000. We then had 5 years of it basically being flat. Every year, it pretty much made the same as the last year. And since 2015, the record industry has been back in growth. And that is almost entirely as a result of this streaming boom. So that the streaming services are growing every month, every quarter, every year, and they are growing enough to take the wider record industry back into growth. Most of the streaming boom is coming from paid-for services in the traditional big markets. So free streaming doesn't really make much money for anybody. It's paid for streaming, so Spotify Premium, Apple Music, Deezer Premium, and so on, that is actually bringing in the serious money. Although in those emerging markets I mentioned earlier, they're mainly free services in those countries, but those countries used to generate nothing. Now they're bringing in money. Also, India and China, massive populations. So even though the per head income is very small because they're free services, overall, that's an awful lot of money starting to come in. So we have the traditional important markets. They're still the top 5, but China, Brazil, India are becoming increasingly important. Let's talk about some services. So if you look at the streaming market, there are a number of services which are more or less global. They're not quite global, either because they haven't launched everywhere yet, or even if they have launched, there's certain countries where people aren't using them. But unlike physical retail, where even if you had a retailer in any one country who totally dominated, no physical retailer was global. They may have operated in 2 or 3 territories, but no physical retailer was global, whereas we have global streaming services. And when it comes to paid-for streaming, which is where we make most of the money, Spotify and Apple are by far the biggest. Okay, so the 2 major paid-for streaming services that bring in most of the money are Spotify and Apple. So Spotify has, at last count, 87 million paying users in just over 70 countries that it operates in, and Apple has about 50 million users in the 100-odd countries that it operates in. Then we have the big free services. So YouTube and SoundCloud have more users. In the case of YouTube, they have a lot more users. So they are bigger in terms of audience, but they don't bring in as much money because the free services pay a lot less. In terms of what you earn, there are so many variables in the way that streaming royalties are calculated, week to week, country to country, service to service, label to label. It's really hard to put some, approximate figures on it. But, I mean, as an example, a premium service is likely paying royalties at least 10 times higher than a free service. So if your music gets streamed on Spotify Premium, you're going to earn 10 times more than if it gets streamed on Spotify Free. So that's how much more lucrative the premium services are. So Spotify and Apple, the big premium services, YouTube and SoundCloud, the big free services. Then we have Amazon, and in the markets where Amazon has a base, Amazon is becoming the third player in streaming. So in the UK, Amazon is huge. In the US, Amazon is huge, and it is becoming the third player in streaming music, mainly through the Echo devices using Alexa. Facebook has no interest in being a streaming service, but it is now licensing music for people to put in their videos, so user-generated content like YouTube. So although Facebook isn't a streaming service, it is now pumping money into the music business when its users put music into the videos they upload. And then we have the Deezers and the Tidals of this world who are still ticking along with a few million subscribers, much smaller than everybody else, but for the time being, they're still there. So those are the global services to be aware of. Spotify and Apple, the biggest. YouTube and SoundCloud, the biggest in terms of users. Spotify and Apple, the biggest in terms of income. Amazon is one to watch. Facebook is interesting. And then we have the smaller services as well. But in addition to those global services, in certain countries around the world, particularly emerging markets, there are local services that are starting to dominate. So, for example, in the US, for starters, we have Pandora and iHeart. They're different services. It's not fully on demand like Spotify. It's what we call a personalized radio experience. They're huge in the US. Don't have them over here, but they're really big in America. Certainly in terms of users. Most people are on the free version, so the revenue is not as significant, but the user base is huge. Then we have China. So in China, local services are dominating. QQ, owned by a company called Tencent, is the biggest, although NetEase, which is another web company with its cloud music service, is slowly starting to catch up. So in China, it's not about Spotify and Apple and YouTube, it's about QQ and NetEase. Russia, Yandex Music and VK Music are the big services there. And then we've got Savan in India, KKBox in Taiwan. So there are certain countries around the world which are becoming important markets where the global services do not dominate, and in some cases, they're not even there. So we need to be aware of the global services, but we also need to be aware of Pandora and iHeart in America, and then the local services in those key emerging markets like China and Brazil and India and Russia. Okay, so that's the easy bit. That's where the market is as of 2018. So streaming is now the biggest revenue stream for the record industry worldwide, although whether or not it is for each individual music industry varies. But it is the biggest for worldwide, and it is certainly the fastest growing worldwide and actually in most territories. Even in countries where physical is still dominant, streaming is still growing the fastest, and CDs are continuing to decline. And then we have a small number of services that dominate globally and a handful of services that dominate in different countries. But what is the relationship between these services I've just mentioned and the music industry? So now we require a little bit of copyright law. So I'm going to give you some very basic copyright law, and then I'm going to explain how the relationships, the deals work between the Spotify and Apple and all of them over here, and the music industry, artists, songwriters, labels, publishers over here. So brace yourself for some copyright law. It's really basic stuff. First thing to say is, every time you write a song, you create a copyright, okay? Copyright rules vary from country to country, but that basic principle is sound worldwide. When you write a song, you create a copyright in the song. Then, when you record a track, you create a separate copyright. Okay, so the basic fact about music copyright is write a song, create a copyright, record a track, create a separate copyright. So we have two sets of music rights. We have the song rights, created by songwriters, and the recording rights created by artists and record producers and so on. So we have two sets of music rights, and therefore we have two music rights businesses. So to date, I've been talking about the record industry, the recorded music business. All of those figures were for record companies. But then we have the music publishers and the collecting societies on the song side of the business. So we have two music rights industries. We have the record industry doing recording rights, and we have the publishing business doing song rights. Even though most artists today write songs and record tracks, so they create both sets of rights, even though the three biggest record companies in the world are Sony, Universal, and Warner, and the three biggest music publishers in the world are Sony, Universal, and Warner, same artists, same companies, two separate industries. We have the song rights business and the recording rights business. And the reason why that's relevant is we have two sets of rights, which means that if you are setting up a streaming service, so let's pretend we're not artists, we're not working in the music business. Let's say you were going to set up a Spotify rival. I don't suggest that you do. If you wanted to set up a streaming service tomorrow to compete with Spotify, I would say that you would need, at the basic absolute minimum, $1 billion in the bank. Okay, if you didn't have $1 billion in the bank, you cannot launch a streaming service. But let's say somebody in the room knows how to get their hands on $1 billion, and you decided to launch a streaming service. If you decided to launch a streaming service, you would then need to license your content, get access to songs and recordings. And in the main, you would do that separately. You would do one set of deals to get recording rights, and then you would do a separate set of deals to get the song rights. Did I do that right? Recording rights and song rights. Two sets of deals. Recording rights deals and song rights deals. Second bit of copyright law. Copyright is all about control. The reason copyright exists is to give creators and their business partners control over what happens to their songs and recordings, or whatever it is that they've created. So that's all copyright is. Copyright law says you wrote a song, you now have control over what happens to that song. You recorded a track, you now have control over what happens to that track. That's all copyright is. And copyright law provides a specific list of controls. The list varies from country to country, but it'll be something like this: the reproduction control, the distribution control, rental adaptation, performance, and communication control. Technically, there's 7, because there's this thing called making available. There's not time today to explain what that is. I treat that as a subset of communication. But all you need to know about this is, what copyright law says is, if you own the copyright in a song or a recording, only you have the automatic right to copy, distribute, rent, adapt, perform, and communicate that song. Or to reproduce, distribute, rent, adapt, perform, and communicate that recording. Only you can do those things. If anyone else wants to do one of those things with your song or your recording, they have to come to you for permission. And you sell them your permission. And that's how copyright makes money. So that's all copyright is. In the music industry, we tend to group the two at the top together, call them things like the mechanical rights, the two at the bottom, performing rights, or sometimes people call them the neighboring rights. What the music industry does is it takes the terminology that sits in copyright law, it ignores it, it makes up its own jargon so that it's more confusing. So we have all these terms in the music industry where if you went to look at copyright law, almost certainly doesn't mention it. So when people talk about mechanical rights, they mean the reproduction and distribution controls. And when they talk about performing or neighboring rights, they mean the performance and communication controls. The only reason I'm telling you all of this is, going back to our streaming service that we're setting up, if you were to set up a streaming service, as I say, you would need to do two sets of deals. You'd need to secure the recording rights through one set of deals and the song rights through another set of deals. But when you are negotiating those deals, a stream is both a copy and a communication at the same time. So when you do those deals and you're talking to the publishers and the collecting societies on the song rights side, you'd have to say, we need permission to use your songs. And more specific than that, we need permission to make copies of your songs and to communicate your songs. And then you would go to the record industry and you'd say, okay, we need to use your recordings. But more specifically than that, we need to make copies of your recordings and we need to communicate your recordings. So when you were to do these deals, that will be a really important part of the conversation, for a reason I will explain in a moment. So that's basically how a streaming service starting out accesses its music. It goes to the record industry and does one set of deals, getting permission to copy and communicate recordings, and it goes to the music publishing business and does another set of deals and gets permission to copy and communicate the songs. As for who these deals are actually being done with, on the recording side, it's the record companies and the music distributors. So if you were setting up your streaming service tomorrow, the first people you would go to is Sony, Universal, and Warner, the major record companies, to license their recordings. They also distribute music for independent labels. So you would get all the music represented by the majors themselves, and they would probably bundle into the deal all the music they distribute for other people. So you go to the majors and their distributors. Then you go to an organization called Merlin, which represents about half of the indie label sector worldwide, and Merlin would get you a whole load of indies. And then for everybody else, you would go to the distributors. And some distributors represent labels, and some distributors represent self-releasing artists. And this is how you would access the content. So you would do your deals with the majors, you do the deal with Merlin, which gets you about half of the indie labels worldwide, and then you would get everything else by going to the distributors. Some distributors, like the ones on there, are global, others are local. So in every country, there will be a distributor who specializes in local repertoire. And then TuneCore, Ditto, CD Baby, etc., they work directly with self-releasing artists. Now, you may be aware that Spotify, having done all of those deals, has now opened up a new route, which is to say to self-releasing artists, maybe we could do a deal directly with you. Now, they haven't actually properly launched that yet, but this time next year, as a DIY artist, you will be able to provide your music directly to Spotify, rather than via a distributor. So Spotify have added an extra route to content. We have a deal with the majors, we have a deal with Merlin, we have a deal with all of those distributors, but actually, if a DIY artist wants to, we'll do a deal directly with them as well. If you sign up to Spotify's direct upload tool when it's available, it's not available yet, but it will be in the next year, as an artist, and you upload your content, there will be a whole load of terms and conditions, which you will not read. But I will tell you that one of the terms in that terms and conditions will say, I, as a self-releasing artist, are granting you, Spotify, permission to exploit both the copying bit and the communicating bit of my sound recordings. And that's one of the terms in the terms and conditions, because that's the permission that Spotify needs to make use of your recordings. But this is just recordings, okay? So if you were to directly sign up with Spotify, you would only be granting them permission to use your recording rights, not your song rights. Now, assuming you have also written the song, obviously, if it's a cover version, if you cover an Ed Sheeran song, then you're not due any publishing because Ed Sheeran will get the publishing. But if you've written the song, you're also due royalties for that. You also need to grant permission for that. But you will not do that via direct upload. You wouldn't do it via a distributor. The labels aren't doing that either. Because, as remember, the publishing, the song rights are licensed separately. And in the main, that is done by the collecting societies, the collective licensing system. So every country has one or more collecting societies representing songwriters and music publishers, and in the main, they license the streaming services. Now, if we flip this back and imagine for a moment you're the person with $1 billion setting up a streaming service, and I'm now telling you to license song rights, you have to go to the collecting societies. There are 150 collecting societies in the world. That's a lot of deals. So some of these societies are now collaborating, and they've set up what we call copyright hubs. So there's an organization called Harmonia, which will get you a lot of the southern European societies in one go. And there's an organization called ICE that will get you Sweden, the UK, and Germany in one go. So the societies have recognized that 150 deals is a lot of effort, and so they're now starting to collaborate. Once you get on the publishing side, actually things get complicated. And the good news is I'm not going to tell you most of the complications this morning, but I'm going to tell you a couple. Because in France and Germany and Italy and Sweden, it's quite straightforward. You go to the collecting society and you get your deal. However, if you're in Canada and you go to SOCAN, which is the Performing Rights Organization, so sort of the SACEM of Canada is called SOCAN. And if you go to SOCAN and do a deal, SOCAN will say, we can do you a deal. Oh, but by the way, we can only license the communication bit. We can't license the copy bit, not our job. We don't have permission to license the writers and the publishers' copying bit. So we can give you the communication bit, and then you have to go to this other organization called CMRRA to license the copying bit. And this happens in all of the Anglo-American markets. So the UK, the US, Ireland, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. And worldwide, they're very important markets because they have big global artists and big global repertoire. In the UK, the two organizations are called PRS and MCPS. The good news is they work together. So we've made it a bit simpler in the UK because the two organizations work together. In the US, BMI, ASCAP, CSAC, Global Music Rights, they only do the communication bit. They don't do the copying bit. So you say, okay, who does the copying bit? And the American music industry will tell you, no one. We never got round to setting up a collecting society. We're really sorry. We've been very busy for the last 50 years. We never set one up, which has made licensing in America a nightmare. It's why Spotify are currently being sued for $1.2 billion. They're about to set one up. Okay, so they're about to set up for the first time ever a society for what we call the mechanical rights in America. So just like the other Anglo-American markets, you will be able to go and get the communication bit covered through BMI and ASCAP, and then the copying bit covered through this new society yet to be launched. And then there's one final complication, which is the big publishers, these are some of them, decided that they didn't want the collecting societies to license the streaming services. And so the big publishers now license, albeit only their Anglo-American repertoire, through direct deals. So the collecting societies aren't representing the Anglo-American repertoires of these publishers when it comes to streaming. The publishers themselves are doing the deals because they reckon they can get more money. And in the main, they do. So to summarize, on the publishing side, you would have to go to the big publishers and do some direct deals, and then all the collecting societies and the collecting society hubs, and in some countries that would mean one collecting society for the communication bit and another collecting society for the copying bit, to make sure you're covered for all of the songs that you are streaming. This is why you need $1 billion in the bank, because it's a lot of work to get all these deals done. Which brings us to the question, what is the deal? What is the deal that Universal and Sony ATV and Warner Chappell and Merlin and Gamer and SACEM and all of the societies, what is the deal that they have done with the streaming services? Now, most of those deals are secret. You're not allowed to look at them. Even if you were a superstar artist signed to Sony Music or Universal, and you went to Sony and Universal and said, I want to see the deal, they would tell you that you're not allowed to see the deal. So most of the deals are secret. However, they are at their heart revenue share deals. Oh, hang on a second, let me skip. They're revenue share deals. And basically, the way it's been set up is that all the money that comes into Spotify and Apple and Tidal and Deezer, etc., of all the money that comes in, about 50 to 60% of it will end up with record companies, because that's the deal that they have done with the record companies. So all the money that's coming in every month, 50 to 60% of it will ultimately end up with a record company and a music distributor who will then share it with their artists. And about 10 to 15% of the money will end up with publishers and the collecting societies and ultimately being shared with songwriters. And Spotify is hoping, as are Apple and Deezer, etc., that once all of that has been handed over, they're left with about 30% of the money. So at their heart, these are revenue share deals. What Spotify and Apple, etc., are promising to do with the music industry is to share their revenue. And so the money splits up something approximately like this. The big box is record companies and recording artists. The little box is songwriters and publishers. And then the service is aiming to keep about 30% of the money down the line. And this brings us to the really complicated bit. Are you ready for the really complicated bit? Because at its heart, streaming is a revenue share business, but it is revenue share based on consumption share. Everybody's obsessed by the rate. Every time I track streams on Spotify, what is the rate? There is no rate. Okay, there is not a per stream rate on any of the streaming services. It is revenue share based on consumption share. So what happens every single month is this. Spotify sits down and says, okay, how many subscriptions did we sell in France last month? Premium subscriptions. How much money did we make? We made €1 million. Okay, we made €1 million. That wouldn't be a very good month, but let's say they made €1 million. How many streams were delivered last month? 1 billion streams in France were delivered last month. 1 billion tracks were streamed across all the members. Okay, so that's step one. How much money did we make? €1 million. How many streams? 1 billion. Okay, of everything that we streamed last month, of all those billion streams, what percentage were universal music controlled tracks? 20%. Okay, of all the money that we have collected, we're going to allocate 20% of that to Universal Music. Then we have a rev share deal with Universal Music. For easy maths, let's say it's 50-50. Actually, it would probably be 53-54% to Universal's favor for Spotify. But let's say it's 50-50. So, million euro, billion streams. Of all the streams, 20% is Universal's catalog. So we're going to allocate 20% of the million to Universal. So that's €200,000. And we have a 50-50 deal. So we're going to give them 50% of that money. And that's what they do. And they would give Universal the 100 grand. I mean, actually, it would be a lot more than that now. But they give them 100 grand based on that metric. And then they repeat the same equation for Sony Music, and the same equation for Warner Music, and the same equation for Merlin, and the same equation for every single distributor they have a deal with. And that's only the recordings. They then do the same equation for Sony ATV, Universal Music Publishing, Warner Chappell, BMG, Cobalt, and then every collecting society in the world. And they keep doing those sums until everybody has been paid. And the hope is that once all of that has happened, about 30% of the money is still on the table, and Spotify banks that money. So that is what's happening every month. It then, when it hands over the money to the label, it also hands over a spreadsheet of everything that was streamed. And it says to Sony and Universal, and to Merlin, and to CD Baby and TuneCore, okay, here's your money. Here's a spreadsheet of everything that was streamed. You work out what the artists are due. And then it's for the label and the distributors to work out what they now owe their artists based on the record deal or the distribution deal that they have done. So that's quite complicated, isn't it? There's then an added complication, which is actually there are 5 elements to the deal. And I've only talked about one of them, which is revenue share. The problem with revenue share deals is that when a streaming service first launches, it doesn't have any revenue. So what the music industry said was, okay, Spotify, it's great that you're offering to give us 55% of revenue every month, but you don't have any revenue. And 55% of nothing is nothing. So as well as our revenue share deal, we also want some minimum guarantees. Now, what those minimum guarantees are vary from deal to deal, from service to service, from country to country. But they might be, every single time one of our tracks streams, we want 0.4 of a cent. That might be the minimum guarantee. Or it might be for every subscriber you sign up, we want €1. Or it might be for every month we're in business together, we want €100,000. And every deal is different, but you put those minimum guarantees into the deal. The other things on a first deal, you would ask for advance equity and fees. So if we go back to our example, if we were setting up a streaming service tomorrow and we were to go to Universal Music and we would say, okay, we've got $1 billion, we want to set up a streaming service, can we do a deal? And Universal Music would be like, of course we can do a deal. Okay, this is the deal. We want 55% of your revenue based on consumption share. Actually, they will probably ask for 60, and you would try and negotiate them down to 55. We want 55% of revenue based on consumption share. We want a 0.4 of a cent per stream minimum guarantee. We also need €5 million in our bank account tomorrow morning for this deal to be done. That will be a recoupable advance, but we want that in our bank account tomorrow. Oh, we also want 4% of your business, and any IT, legal, or admin fees that we incur as part of this deal, we're going to invoice you for that. But providing you are willing to give us 60% of your revenue, a 0.4 cent minimum guarantee on every stream, 5 million in our bank account tomorrow, 4% of your business, and you will allow us to invoice you all of our costs, let's do a deal. And those are the streaming deals. It's why it's really expensive to enter this market. It's why very few people have. Obviously, first deal you do will be a terrible deal. 3 years later, you renew it. The service gets a better deal. 3 years, you do it again. The service gets an even better deal. 3 years later, you renew it again. The service gets an even better deal. And that's what Spotify have been doing for the last 10 years. They're about to start renegotiating the next round of deals. And every time, Spotify gets more because its negotiating hand increases. But what this means is that every month, in addition to all of that, you have to say, okay, what do we owe under the minimum guarantee system? We've worked out what we owe them under our revenue share arrangement, but is the minimum guarantee maths higher? Because if it turns out under minimum guarantee we owe them €200,000, then we pay them €200,000, even though our revenue share deal says that we owed them €100,000. So that's the complicated bit. Did you follow that? Okay, so that is what is happening every single month. I'm just going to go back very quickly to those slides that I skipped over. For those of you who are DIY artists in the room, and you might be thinking, okay, what does this mean for me? And in some ways, some of what I've told you today, day to day, isn't relevant to you. But if you are an artist starting out today, you need to get your music into the system. And when you get your music into the system, even if you don't realize it, you are entering into the deals that I've just described. And this is how your distributor or your label or your publisher or your collecting society works out what you are due every month. And so what that means is, as an artist, most artists start with YouTube and SoundCloud because you can have a direct relationship with those services. You just go onto the YouTube website and the SoundCloud website, you sign up, you upload your content, and then as soon as you fulfill the criteria, you can start monetizing that content. So once you've got a certain amount of traffic on your YouTube channel, you become a content partner. Actually, with SoundCloud now, you just have to pay them a little bit of money and you become a content partner. And in doing this, in those T's and C's you don't read, you're granting these services permission to exploit the copying and the communication bits of your sound recording copyright in return for a rev share arrangement. For all the other services, you need a distributor. So you would pick one of these distributors. These all work directly with artists. Most of them will work with any artist. AWOL does have a little bit of A&R going on as well. And the distributor will sit between you and the services. But when you sign up to DistroKid, the T's and C's that you don't read, what you are doing is you are granting DistroKid permission to grant Spotify permission to exploit the copying and the communication bit of your sound recording copyrights in return for payments on a rev share basis. That is what is happening when you sign up to one of these distributors. Of course, that's only your recording rights. So when it comes to your song rights, it will be your collecting society that is dealing with that. So it depends where you live. If you're living in continental Europe, it will be one society, so SACEM if you're in France, Gamer if you're in Germany. If you're in an Anglo-American market, actually you need to be in two collecting societies to get all the money that you are due. So that's what you need to do as a DIY artist. And I'll leave you with this final thought. I know probably what I've said to you this morning sounds quite complicated, and it is Saturday morning, and you're at the day 3 of a big festival. Actually, getting your music into the services is the easy bit. It's good for you to understand actually what you're doing when you sign up to these services, or sign up to a distributor, or sign up to a collecting society, the rights that you are granting those organizations. It's good to understand that there isn't a rate. How you are getting paid depends not on how often your music is streamed, but on what percentage overall of consumption you accounted for. But actually, getting your music streaming is quite easy. The hardest bit is getting people to listen. And actually, the big thing that everybody in the music industry has been really having to deal with over the last 10 years is that streaming is a fundamentally different business to discs and downloads. So when you sell a CD or you sell a download, you put out a record, you have a release date, you do a load of marketing, people buy your music. If they're going to buy it, they'll probably buy it within the first couple of months. They pay you an upfront fee, you bank that money, you go on tour, you forget about the record. In the streaming age, even if you have a really successful launch, even if you do everything right around the record coming out, the money you will make in those first few weeks, those first few months is not enough because it's tiny fractions of a euro, of a cent, of a penny per stream based on consumption share. It's really small sums of money. But crucially, every time people listen to your music, you earn again. Every month that you're accounting for some of Spotify's overall consumption, you earn again. And so the trick in the streaming age is what we're all pushing for is sustained listening. You need people not to just listen to your music the day it comes out. You need them to listen to your music again and again and again and again and again and again every day for the next 5 years. And if you do, at some point you will pass that white line. And at that point, you are now making more money out of streaming than you could ever have done by selling discs and downloads, because you continue to earn. So beyond all the legalities and deals and royalties I've been talking about today, this is a marketing challenge. How do you persuade your fans not just to listen to your music when it's new, but to keep on listening to it again and again and again and again and again and again, so that slowly but surely the money adds up? And everybody in the music industry, from the majors to the smallest labels, from the superstars to the brand new grassroots artists, are all dealing with this challenge, that it's no longer about sales around release, it's about sustained listening every day for the next 5 years. If you are interested in what I've talked about today, remember there's the book that you can buy, or you can just download the slides. If you go to this URL, everything I've just said and shown, you can download for your own pleasure. I am pretty much out of time, so I'm not rushing off though. So I think rather than taking questions from the floor, because we've got 90 seconds left, and so I probably couldn't answer the question in 90 seconds, and there's also another thing starting in here in 15 minutes, but I will go and stand over there out of the way. So if you do have any questions about anything I've said, I'm not rushing off, so come and grab me and I will try and answer it. Go on.
Can I ask just one quick question?
Very quick.
In terms of geographical areas,
Yes.
does that mean that if you have streams in the UK, probably you're getting paid less than getting streams in a smaller country like Greece, for example, because the population is smaller?
No, because the overall money coming in is higher. So you're right, you will make up for a small amount of consumption, but then because the population's bigger, the amount of money that's coming in is higher. So even if you're 0.00001%, but there's $1 billion instead of $1 million, then obviously you're going to see more money. And basically, the mature markets bring in way more money. Okay, so download the slides if you're interested. Buy the book if you're really interested. Yeah, I'll go and stand just outside there once I've packed up my laptop and got out of the way, and I can answer any questions that you have. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.